China celebrates 3 decades of free market reform that turned it into a global economic power. But as the chill winds of the financial crisis set in, how will Beijing respond? And what does it mean for China's future? This is Inside Story. Hello there, welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. China's ruling Communist Party has celebrated the 30th anniversary of reforms introduced by Deng Xiaoping, reforms that transformed the country's economy and in doing so transformed the world. According to World Bank statistics, China is the second biggest economy after the United States and still growing. But even China can't escape the global economic crisis, which is threatening the country's development. Factories have closed, tens of thousands have lost their jobs, and suddenly China's economic surge is grinding to a halt. Bethan Howe has more.
China celebrates 3 decades of reforms that have made it one of the world's most successful economies.
In the past 30 years, we have placed great importance on creating a vibrant society and enhancing economic growth by increasing efficiency. In addition to fast economic development, we also focused on building a harmonious society by ensuring equality among the people.
The Chinese economic reforms were brought in by Deng Xiaoping in the late 70s. They were aimed at generating profit that would fund economic modernization, something no prior Chinese socialist initiative had managed to achieve. 30 years later, China's economy is booming. It's expected to match and even overtake the USA as the world's largest economy in a matter of years. Average annual income is now almost $3,000 per person, compared with just $55 in 1978. Almost all Chinese families now have a television set, and around 15 million own private cars, something that was unthinkable when the reforms were introduced. There's no argument that they haven't been a success. They opened China up to an influx of Western producers who took advantage of the copious amounts of cheap labour. But it's not all harmonious. Economic reforms benefited those in and around cities where industry and jobs could be found easily. But the gap between the poor in rural areas and those employed in cities has widened. Recent product safety scandals have dogged Chinese production. The global financial crisis is hitting China's export market, which makes up a substantial amount of the country's income. Foreign investment has dropped by 36.5% since November 2007. This is forcing factories to close, and tens of thousands of people have lost their livelihoods. The reforms of the 70s focused entirely on the economy, but China has avoided any human rights reforms.
Economic progress doesn't mean that society will be stable. To create a harmonious society, you need to satisfy people in other areas too. The 3 aspects are property rights, political rights, and an independent judiciary. Only with them can you create a harmonious society. Otherwise, it is impossible.
Such absence of human rights hasn't stopped Western companies from investing. And with the economic reforms having such a successful track record until recently, President Hu is convinced that democracy would not benefit his country.
Only socialism can save China. Only reform can develop China. Develop socialism and develop Marxism. The direction and the path we've taken are totally correct. The achievements are undeniable. Stopping or reversing it would only lead to a dead end.
Bethan Howe for Inside Story.
So what does it all mean for China? To discuss the issues, I'm joined in London by Andrew Leung. He's the chairman of Andrew Leung International Consultants and has held numerous positions within the Hong Kong government. Also in London, Zhe. She's a journalist with New Tang Dynasty TV. That's a US-based Chinese television channel. And in Virginia, Bruce Reynolds. He's Professor of Economics at the University of Virginia and former editor of the China Economic Review. Welcome to all 3 of you. Bruce, let me start with you. Just a few weeks ago, we were talking about the strength of China's economy. I mean, we know it's got huge foreign reserves and strong markets, but last month its exports fell for the first time in 7 years. Chinese authorities have had to cut interest rates. So just what position is China in given the current economic situation?
Well, surely I'm very optimistic for the long haul with regard to the Chinese economy. China is in what I would call a demographic sweet spot. They've got a young labor force. They've still got lots of opportunity to bring advanced technology into their country. And so for the long haul, I'm bullish on China's economic growth prospects. That being said, we understand that we are now in a difficult spot worldwide, and China, along with the U.S., has to cope with this short-term economic crisis.
Andrew, what do you think? How strong is China's position? Because, after all, it is still the country that others turn to, for example, Pakistan, to help it out of the problem.
Well, China, unlike many other countries, needs to produce something like 20 million jobs a year just to stay even. And there, China is now suffering from a double whammy. The first one, of course, is even before the global financial crisis, China's industrial development is being rejigged or re-engineered because China is not making any money to speak of by continuing to produce cheap goods. The margin has been driven very, very thin. So that's why the factory has been starting to close already, even before the financial crisis. Now, secondly, of course, the financial crisis has hurt China very, very badly. In the coastal provinces, the factories are closing. But the challenge for China is to continue to produce these 20 million jobs to stay even, to maintain social stability. And hence China has now recently launched this huge stimulus package. 75% of the money is going to infrastructure. Why? Because the infrastructure will produce this kind of jobs, the kind of jobs which would absorb the excess labor from the countryside, not all the engineers and analysts, and they are only in very, very small numbers. But China needs to produce huge a number of jobs to stay even.
OK, well, let's talk about that social stability. Z, I think you were hearing Bruce, our first speaker there, talking about in the long run, obviously China's economy is expected to grow. But what is the situation now? What has the impact been on Chinese people with the job losses? What kind of problems are they suffering?
Well, from the product point of view, China's product produced in China are those labor-intensive products, and it's quite heavily depends on the order from other countries. That's why some people make comments, China is the world factory. So if the financial crisis started already, and also the demand in Western society has been dropped sharply, so the demand for China's product will also drop, and China's market will be heavily affected. And in addition to this, the core issue of China economically related is the high level of pollution and high percentage of exploitation rather than high percentage of domestic consumption.
Okay, well, I just want to ask about the people themselves. For example, all these factory workers who've lost their jobs. I mean, do they get any protection? What happens to them?
Well, there is not a proper system to protect their unemployed people, and the core issue of China is actually no respect to basic human rights. For over 50 years since the Communist Party take over, so for example, the Voice of America just reported there has been 260 staff unemployed because their factory, a shoe factory in Dongguan, has been bankrupt, and they couldn't get their salary or wages paid, and they have been protesting on the street, blocking the street. And also there is another report like the taxi drivers in Sichuan province is on strike because they are low profit making. A man called Shi Guoqing is a taxi driver. He said because of the prices has gone up, he only got 300 Chinese yuan per month. One day after work.
Sorry to interrupt, Bruce.
He counted his profit.
Can I bring Bruce here in? I mean, one of the problems is that China's obviously so dependent on foreign markets and exports. I mean, can it change that?
Well, I certainly agree with that Chinese factory workers have much less protection and much less job stability than workers in high-income industrialized countries. But let me try to frame this a little bit. We're talking about a labor force of perhaps 100 to 140 million workers in export-oriented factories along the seacoast. That may seem like a large number, but China's entire labor force is more like 700 million. So the export sector is only one part of the Chinese economy. Within that sector, as pointed out, the workers who are focused on light industrial, labor-intensive goods are going to find that their jobs are disappearing over time. And many of them, really tens of millions of them, may have to migrate back to the rural areas from which they came. But I'm not sure that we should view that as the prospect for total collapse for the Chinese economy. Even exports, if the U.S. economy contracts by 6%, which is really a worst-case scenario, that should mean, ceteris paribus, that China's exports to the U.S. would drop by 6%. So it's not as though things were coming to a standstill.
But
so
can I bring
I'm
Andrew in
optimistic that
very
especially
briefly
with the stimulus package that Andrew pointed out.
Yeah, very briefly, Andrew, I just wanted to ask you, Bruce mentions the stimulus package there. I mean, in the short term, what do you think the situation's going to be?
Well, I think that in the short term, the prognosis are not very good because, as I said, it was a double whammy. But against that, of course, China has now been selling more to the Asian neighbors compared with the previous total reliance on the American market and on the EU market. So that would act as a kind of cushion. But also, as my colleague pointed out, export is not the be-all and end-all. It is only a proportion of the Chinese economy. A large part of the Chinese economy is driven by internal investment. And the stimulus package is going to have a very, very positive impact on that. But in the short term, China is also suffering from an excess capacity during the past few years. And it will take some time to work off this excess capacity. And we can see inflation is going down, even in food prices. So this it would be positive to the livelihood to some people, but on the other hand, could present problems for some businesses. But I think that it would take about a year or so to work this out. And I think that in a year or so, the impact of the stimulus package, together with the rejigging of the economy, it would take some effect.
OK. All right, let's take a short break now. When we come back, we're going to be asking, what is the West's relationship with China? Is it a policy of isolation or integration? Stay with us.